Of all the things I've had to do in my life, telling this story is one of the hardest. But it's a true story. It happened to me, and I think it's important to share how you can find strength in the places others think are your weaknesses. The cool, conditioned air of the restaurant felt like a separate world, a bubble of hushed clinking and murmured conversations floating high above Chicago. We were at Everest, 40 floors up, the city sprawling below us like a blanket of scattered diamonds. It was our 10th anniversary, and Mark, my husband, had anchored the night around a small, spiral-bound notebook resting beside his wine glass. It was my therapy journal. As his boss, a silver-haired man named Julian with a predatory smile, watched expectantly, Mark picked it up and said, with the easy charm that had once captivated me, "Sarah's been exploring her feelings. It's been illuminating." He then opened it to a page he had clearly bookmarked and, in a voice dripping with mock sincerity, read my most private, fearful words about feeling inadequate as a mother to our 5-year-old daughter. Lily, words I had written just the night before in the supposed safety of our bedroom, twisting my raw anxiety into a punchline about his overly sensitive, therapy-addicted wife. Julian laughed, a short barking sound, and in that moment, 40 floors above the city, my perfect life shattered. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The ride home in the Uber was a vacuum of silence. The city lights smeared across the window, a watercolor painting of a life I suddenly no longer recognized. Mark didn't speak, just stared straight ahead, a smug, unreadable expression on his face. When we finally walked into the sterile, quiet foyer of our Lincoln Park brownstone, he tossed his keys into the porcelain bowl on the console table, the clatter echoing in the cavernous space. "Lighten up, Sarah," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Julian has a dark sense of humor. It was just a joke." I didn't answer. I walked past him, up the floating staircase, my hand trailing on the cold steel rail. A joke. He had taken something so deeply personal, a wound I had entrusted only to my therapist and my private journal, and filleted it for the amusement of a man he wanted to impress. It wasn't a joke. It was a public execution of my vulnerability. I had started seeing Dr. Anya Sharma 6 months earlier. The anxiety had crept in slowly after Lily was born, a quiet, suffocating vine that wrapped around my days. It wasn't the dramatic, crying in the shower kind of postpartum depression you see in movies. It was subtler. It was the heart-pounding fear that Lily would stop breathing in her sleep, forcing me to check on her a dozen times a night. It was the obsessive need to sterilize every surface, the social withdrawal, the feeling that I was failing at the one thing I had given up my art career for. Mark had been dismissive from the start. "Therapy is for people with real problems, Sarah," he'd said, waving a hand as if to clear away a bad smell. "You have a beautiful home, a healthy daughter, a husband who provides for you. What is there to be depressed about?" To him, it was a frivolous expense, a form of professional navel-gazing. He paid the bill from our joint account each month, but not without a sigh or a pointed comment about the cost of talking about your feelings. That night, after the disastrous dinner, I locked myself in our master bathroom. The room was Mark's sanctuary, all gray Italian marble and chrome fixtures, cold and impersonal, just like him. I stared at my reflection in the vast backlit mirror. I looked pale, my eyes wide with a pain so sharp it felt physical. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. For years I had accepted his narrative, that I was the sensitive one, the one who needed to toughen up, the one who was lucky to have him. But seeing the cruel satisfaction in his eyes as Julian laughed, that had been a different kind of betrayal. It wasn't just dismissal. It was contempt. Dr. Sharma had been trying to teach me about pattern recognition, about listening to the quiet hum of my own intuition. "Your feelings are not illnesses, Sarah," she'd said in our last session. "They are data." And as I stood there, the data was finally adding up. The illusion of our perfect marriage, so carefully constructed and maintained, had been incinerated in the space of a single, heartless joke. A quiet, cold suspicion began to settle in my gut, a feeling I knew with terrifying certainty I could no longer ignore. The man I had married wasn't just dismissive. He was cruel, and I had the sinking feeling that this was just the tip of a very dark, very cold iceberg. I just had to find the rest of it. The next morning, Mark acted as if nothing had happened. He came into the kitchen, already dressed in a crisp Xenia suit, kissed the top of my head, and poured himself a coffee. "Big day today," he announced to the room. "Closing the Henderson deal." He was all breezy confidence, the master of his universe. I just nodded, spooning oatmeal into a bowl for Lily, my movements stiff and robotic. The humiliation from the night before was a physical weight in my chest. He was trying to gaslight me with his normalcy, to make me feel like I was the one who had overreacted. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The lens through which I viewed him was now cracked, and I was seeing things I'd been blind to for years. The way he angled his phone away from me when a text came through. The vague answers about his frequent late nights at the office. The way his eyes would glaze over when I tried to talk about my day. I'd always chalked it up to the stress of his high-pressure job in private equity. Now, I saw it for what it was. Deliberate concealment. Dr. Sharma's voice was a calm anchor in my mind. "Trust your gut. It's data, too." My gut was screaming. For the first time, I decided to listen. My investigation didn't start with some dramatic, movie-style hacking. It started small, with observation. For a week, I was the perfect, docile wife he expected me to be. I made his favorite dinners, asked about his day with feigned interest, and said nothing more about the anniversary dinner. I let him believe he had won, that I had accepted my place. His guard dropped. He became sloppy. The first real clue came from our joint bank account, the one he so generously allowed me access to for household expenses. Mark was meticulous with money. Every major expense went on his corporate Amex. Personal expenses were carefully budgeted. So when I saw a $128 charge from the Signature Lounge at the 96th, a high-end cocktail bar atop the John Hancock Center, I knew something was wrong. It was from a Tuesday night 2 weeks prior, a night he was supposedly buried in paperwork at his office in the Loop. More importantly, he had used our debit card. It was a rookie mistake, so unlike him. He must have been distracted, or perhaps so confident in my obliviousness that he didn't feel the need to hide. The Signature Lounge. It wasn't a place you went for a quick beer after work. It was a destination. A place for dates, for seduction, with panoramic views of the city. I felt a knot of ice form in my stomach. The data was piling up. That evening, while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone from the nightstand. My hands were trembling. I didn't know his passcode, and I wasn't going to try to guess. Instead, I just looked at his home screen from the lock screen notifications. I saw the usual clutter. Bloomberg, ESPN, a dozen unread emails. But there was also a notification from an app I didn't recognize. Signal, a secure messaging app. Why would a man in finance need an encrypted messaging app? A cold dread washed over me. The final piece of the puzzle for that day clicked into place via our shared family iPad. We used it to track each other's locations, a feature Mark had insisted on for safety when Lily started preschool. I never checked it, but now I opened the Find My app. I saw my dot at home and Lily's at her school. Then I saw Mark's. It showed him at his office. But I tapped on his icon and looked at the location history. Last Tuesday at 10:30 p.m., his phone hadn't been at his office on Wacker Drive. It had pinged for over 2 hours from a location in the Gold Coast, a residential address on North State Parkway. It was a luxury condominium building, the Elysian. Miles from his office. Miles from the Signature Lounge. I pulled up the address on Google Street View. The image of a sleek, modern high-rise filled my screen, its glass facade reflecting the gray Chicago sky. A doorman stood sentinel out front. It was a place for the very, very wealthy, a place to keep secrets. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I was staring at the screen, my mind racing, trying to connect the dots. The cocktail lounge, the encrypted messages, the luxury condo, when the sound of his key turning in the front door lock made me jump. I slammed the iPad shut, my whole body trembling, the cold dread solidifying into a terrible, undeniable certainty. My husband was living a second life. I managed to compose myself just as he walked into the living room, a towel slung around his neck. "Hey," he said, "you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Just tired," I lied, my voice thin. "Long day with Lily." The ease with which the lie came to my lips scared me. He bought it, of course. Why wouldn't he? In his world, I was simple, predictable, and transparent. The next day, I decided to test the waters. Over breakfast, as I packed Lily's lunch, I mentioned the bank statement. I kept my tone light, casual. "Hey, I was going over our finances and saw a charge for the Signature Lounge a couple of weeks ago. Did you take a client out?" His reaction was instantaneous and volcanic, but it wasn't the hot rage of a guilty man caught in a lie. It was something far more chilling. His face hardened and his eyes went cold. He put down his coffee cup with a deliberate, sharp click. "Are you checking up on me now, Sarah?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Is this what your therapist is telling you to do? To comb through our bank statements looking for imaginary problems?" He stood up and walked around the kitchen island until he was standing over me. I was with a client, a very important one. We were finalizing the Henderson deal, a deal that, by the way, pays for this house, for Lily's school, and for your little therapy hobby. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You need to stop this. You're becoming paranoid. You're letting this woman, this stranger, fill your head with poison and turn you against me. It's unhealthy." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. He didn't just deny. He attacked, reframed, and pathologized my completely rational question. He made me the problem. He made my therapy the villain. I felt myself shrink under his gaze, the old familiar feelings of guilt and self-doubt rushing back in. For a moment, I almost believed him. But then I remembered the condo on North State Parkway, and the cold resolve returned. He was lying. And he was terrifyingly good at it. In the weeks that followed, he began to systematically isolate me. It was subtle, a campaign of 1,000 tiny cuts. He would forget to tell me about dinner plans with our mutual friends, then feign surprise when I was upset. "I'm sorry, honey, it completely slipped my mind. You've been so stressed lately. I thought a quiet night at home would be better for you." He started telling people I was going through a tough time, that I was fragile. He was preemptively discrediting me, painting me as an unstable narrator in our own life story. The financial control tightened. The allowance he transferred to my personal account each month, which I'd once seen as a convenience, now felt like a leash. Everything, the mortgage, the utilities, the car payments, was in his name, paid from accounts I couldn't access. I was a guest in my own life. The final devastating blow came during a seemingly innocuous argument about what time to put Lily to bed. I held my ground and he snapped. "You know, Sarah," he said, his voice laced with venom. "If you ever decided to do something stupid, like leave me, you should know that my firm has the best divorce attorneys in the city on retainer. They would have a field day with your condition. A judge would take one look at your therapist's notes, your documented history of anxiety, and they'd see you as an unfit mother. You would never get custody of Lily. You would walk away from this with nothing." He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. A promise. He saw himself as utterly invincible, protected by his money, his power, and what he perceived as my weakness. He thought he had me trapped. That night, I told Dr. Sharma everything. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, my voice raw with tears and fear, she didn't offer platitudes. She simply said, "He is showing you his strategy, Sarah. He's telling you exactly what he fears most, an attack on his money and his reputation. And he's telling you he will use your daughter as his primary weapon. That clinical detached observation was more clarifying than any expression of sympathy could have been. He had shown me his hand. He thought it was the winning one. A few days later, Mark came home early, a bright, false smile on his face. "I have a surprise," he announced. "I'm taking my best girl on a daddy-daughter weekend. We're going up to the lake house in Michigan. Just the two of us," Lily squealed with delight, but a primal fear gripped me. It wasn't a kind gesture. It was a demonstration of power. A reminder that he could take our daughter, my entire world, away from me whenever he pleased. As I watched him pack her little pink suitcase, a terrifying thought echoed in my mind. He's practicing. The silence in the house after they left was absolute. For 2 days, I was completely alone, a ghost in the beautiful minimalist tomb Mark had built for us. There were no distractions, no Lily to care for, no husband to manage. There was only the truth waiting for me. That suffocating quiet was the best thing that could have happened. It gave me room to think, to breathe, to let the cold rage settle and harden into purpose. I knew what I had to do. I started in his home office, the one room that was exclusively his domain. It was meticulously organized, a reflection of his controlled, ordered mind. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I trusted my intuition to guide me. I started with the obvious. His desk drawers, the filing cabinet, nothing. Just corporate documents, old tax returns, things his lawyers would have sanitized. Then I turned to our family iMac, the one in the corner that we used for photos and Lily's educational games. He rarely used it, preferring his sleek work laptop. It seemed too obvious a place to hide anything. But then I remembered how he always underestimated me, how he saw me as technologically inept. I clicked through the user profiles and logged into his. There was no password. Another sign of his arrogance. The desktop was clean, just a few folders. Family photos, finances, household. I clicked on finances. It was full of the same sanitized documents from the filing cabinet. I was about to give up when my cursor hovered over a strangely named folder deep within the Documents directory, Project Nightingale. My heart began to pound. Nightingale, a bird that sings in the dark. I clicked it open. Inside were not just spreadsheets and emails, but subfolders filled with photographs and scanned documents. The first folder I opened was labeled Amelia. The photos were like a punch to the gut. There was Mark, smiling, looking happier and more relaxed than I had seen him in years. And next to him was a woman, a beautiful brunette. They were on a boat on Lake Michigan at a Cubs game, kissing under the Cloud Gate sculpture in Millennium Park. They were living a whole life in my city, right under my nose. Then I saw the last folder. It was labeled Leo. I clicked, my hand shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. The screen filled with photos of Mark, Amelia, and a baby. A little boy with Mark's dark hair and bright blue eyes. They were in a park, Lincoln Park, our park. They were celebrating a birthday. The cake had a single candle on it. Leo. He was 1 year old. A second family? It wasn't just an affair. It was a complete parallel life. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it transcended pain. The fear, the anxiety, the self-doubt that had plagued me for years, it all burned away in an instant, leaving behind something clean and hard and cold. A diamond of pure, unadulterated rage. He hadn't just lied to me. He had lied to our daughter. He had built his new life on the foundation of our old one, and he was prepared to sacrifice me and Lily to protect it. That was the moment. The turning point. I was no longer a victim in his story. I was going to be the author of his ending. I took out my phone and using a new untraceable burner SIM card I had bought for cash weeks ago, I made a call. I had researched high-conflict divorce attorneys, looking for the most ruthless, formidable shark in Chicago. I found her. "Eleanor Vance's office," a crisp voice answered. "I need to schedule a consultation," I said, my own voice steady and unrecognizable. "It's urgent." As I was on the phone, meticulously photographing every single file in Project Nightingale, a notification pinged on the iMac screen. It was from our Nest doorbell. A thumbnail video showed Mark's car pulling into the driveway. They were home a day early. My blood ran cold. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind racing. I had seconds. I shoved my phone into my pocket, my hands shaking as I navigated back to the login screen, making sure there was no trace of my activity. I raced out of the office, my heart pounding against my ribs like a drum. I was halfway down the stairs when the front door opened. Mark stood there, holding a sleeping Lily in his arms. "We're back," he said, his voice flat. The weather turned. She was getting fussy. He looked at me, his eyes narrowed slightly. "What were you doing?" "You look flushed." I forced a calm I didn't feel. "Just cleaning," I said, my voice a little too high. The house felt so empty, I needed to keep busy. He seemed to accept it, his attention shifting back to our daughter. As he carried her upstairs to her room, I leaned against the wall, my legs weak with adrenaline. It was too close. Far too close. He was unpredictable, and I had underestimated his capacity to disrupt even his own plans. This couldn't happen again. From now on, I had to be smarter, more careful. I had to be flawless. My meeting with Eleanor Vance was in a discreet office building in the West Loop, a world away from the gleaming towers of the financial district. Her office was modern and minimalist, with a single stunning view of the Chicago River. Eleanor herself was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a presence that radiated controlled power. She wore an impeccably tailored suit and listened without interruption as I laid out the whole sordid story, from the public humiliation at our anniversary dinner to the discovery of Project Nightingale. I finished by showing her the hundreds of photos I had taken of the files on my phone. She swiped through them silently, her expression unreadable. "You will pay the amount of child support and alimony detailed on page 47. It is designed to be punitive. It will leave you with enough to live on, but your lifestyle will be significantly altered. You will sign every page tonight, now." He started to speak, the old reflexive bluster rising in his throat. "You can't, my lawyers," I cut him off. "If you say the word lawyers, if you pick up your phone, if you hesitate in any way, Eleanor Vance, who is waiting by her phone, will electronically file the SEC complaint and email the dossier to your firm's compliance department at exactly 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. You will be fired, you will be disbarred from the financial industry for life, and you will likely face federal indictment. Your girlfriend, Amelia, will be named as a co-conspirator in the money laundering scheme. You will both go to prison. You will lose Lily, you will lose Leo, and you will lose your freedom. Or you sign." I slid a pen across the desk. He stared at it as if it were a snake. He looked at the mountain of evidence. At my face. He saw no weakness, no opening, no mercy. He was utterly, completely defeated. The therapy he had mocked, the navel-gazing he had ridiculed, I had used its core principles of patience, observation, and strategy to completely and totally outmaneuver him. He picked up the pen. His hands shook as he signed the first page, his signature a spidery, broken thing. He didn't stop until every document was executed. It was over in less than an hour. It wasn't a fight. It was a surrender. He looked up from the last page, his face a mask of hollow disbelief. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. I looked at him, not with hatred, but with a chilling, detached emptiness. "You read my journal, Mark," I said softly. "You should have paid closer attention to the part about boundaries." I gathered the signed proposal, placed it neatly in my briefcase, and walked out of the room, leaving him alone in the ruins of the life he thought was indestructible. The next 24 hours were a logistical whirlwind. By 9 a.m., Mark's lawyer had received the signed documents and confirmed his immediate compliance. By noon, a moving van was parked outside. I took Lily to the Lincoln Park Zoo while 2 men I had hired packed every last trace of her father into cardboard boxes. When we returned, he was gone. His closets were empty, his car was gone from the garage, His scent was already fading from the rooms. The sudden silence was vast, profound. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a peaceful one. The oppressive weight of his presence, which I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying, was lifted. Our new life began not with a triumphant bang, but with a deep, cleansing exhale. Months passed. A quiet, happy routine settled over us. I started painting again, turning the spare bedroom into a sun-drenched studio. The vibrant colors felt like a reclamation of the woman I had been before Mark had muted my world. Lily thrived, blossoming in the calm, predictable environment of our new two-person family. The anxiety that had once held me hostage loosened its grip, replaced by a steady, quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. One crisp autumn afternoon, I took Lily to the zoo again. As we stood watching the seals, I saw him across the path. He was with Amelia and their son, Leo. He looked diminished, smaller. The aura of power and invincibility he had always projected was gone. He looked tired, stressed, just another anonymous dad in a fleece vest. He didn't see us. He was too busy trying to placate his crying toddler. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. He was just a man I used to know. In my next session with Dr. Sharma, I told her about seeing him. "Therapy wasn't about fixing what was broken in you, Sarah," she said, her voice gentle. "It was never about that. It was about helping you clear away the noise so you could listen to the strength that was already there. You were never weak. You just thought you were." That night, I tucked Lily into bed. She was fast asleep, her face peaceful in the soft glow of her nightlight, safe and sound in our quiet house. I stood by her window looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city lights twinkled, a million tiny promises glittering in the dark. The man who had tried to break me was out there somewhere, a ghost in the city we once shared. He had weaponized my therapy, my vulnerability, my very feelings. But in the end, those were the exact things that saved me. And in the perfect, peaceful silence of our new life, I finally understood that the best revenge wasn't a loud explosion, but the quiet, unshakable calm he could no longer touch. The end. When she was done, she put the phone down on her polished desk and looked at me. "This is good," she said, her voice calm and even. "This is very good. But it's not enough." I stared at her, confused. "Not enough? He has a second family, he's—" She held up a hand. "I know. But Mark's lawyers will paint you as a scorned, vindictive wife who hacked his computer. They will say these documents are inadmissible. They'll claim you fabricated them. And they will use your therapy, your anxiety, against you, just as he threatened. He thinks he's playing chess, and he's already set up the board to his advantage. We are not going to play his game. We are going to create a new one, a game he doesn't even know exists. And in our game, we need more than just evidence of his infidelity. We need leverage, something that makes fighting back unthinkable for him." Her instructions were precise and chilling. "Go home," she said, "and you become the wife he thinks you are. You are fragile. You are broken. You are sorry. You are completely and utterly dependent on him. You will flatter his ego until it's so inflated he can't see past it. Let him think he has crushed you. Let him think he's winning. Arrogant men make mistakes, Sarah. We're going to let him make them for us." And so I went home and became an actress. I gave the performance of a lifetime. I cried. I apologized for being so paranoid and untrusting. I told him he was right, that my therapy was making me see problems where there were none. I even told him I was considering stopping my sessions with Dr. Sharma. Mark soaked it up like a sponge. The relief on his face was palpable, quickly replaced by his familiar, smug superiority. He was magnanimous in his victory, treating me with a cloying, condescending kindness that made my skin crawl. "I knew you'd come to your senses, honey," he'd say, patting my hand. I let him believe it all. While he was basking in his triumph, I was at war. I followed Eleanor's instructions to the letter. I became a ghost in my own house, a meticulous intelligence agent gathering intel. I bought a tiny, voice-activated recorder and hid it behind the thick leather-bound books on the credenza in his home office. I had a tech-savvy friend of a friend install a keylogger on the iMac, disguised as a software update. I documented everything. Every condescending remark, every lie about where he was going, every gaslighting comment that made me question my own sanity. I was no longer gathering evidence for a divorce. I was building a psychological profile, a dossier of his emotional abuse. The therapy journal he had so cruelly mocked became my greatest weapon. I started writing in it again, but this time the words were pure fiction. I filled its pages with pathetic, manufactured entries about my deep-seated insecurities, my fear of being alone, my pathetic gratitude for him putting up with me. I left it on my nightstand, knowing his ego wouldn't be able to resist the temptation to snoop. I was baiting the trap with his own arrogance. One evening, I downloaded the audio from the hidden recorder. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot, the rain drumming on the roof, and listened through my headphones. There it was. A phone call from that afternoon between Mark and Amelia. He was complaining about me, about my latest emotional episode. And then he said the words that sealed his fate. "Just be patient, babe," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "I'm laying the groundwork with my lawyers. We'll use her history of anxiety, her therapist's notes. We'll prove she's an unstable influence. I'll get full custody of Lily. Then we can finally be a real family. You, me, and Leo. No more baggage." He was using my pain, the very thing he had caused, as his primary weapon in a war I didn't even know he was fighting. The rain on the windshield blurred into a meaningless watercolor. There was no more fear. No more sadness. There was only the mission. Eleanor was surgical. "This recording gives us the narrative," she said after I played it for her. "But we need the kill shot. We need financial leverage." She brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet, unassuming man named Arthur who looked more like a librarian than a financial bloodhound. I gave him everything I had, the strange Project Nightingale spreadsheets, the keylogger data that captured account numbers and passwords Mark typed in, and the names of shell corporations I'd overheard him mention on the recorder. Arthur disappeared into a rabbit hole of numbers and data for a week. When he emerged, he had found the silver bullet. Mark wasn't just hiding money from me. He was engaged in serious, indictable financial fraud. He had set up a complex web of offshore accounts and shell corporations to embezzle money from his firm's clients. It wasn't a massive amount, not enough to raise red flags with the firm's auditors, but it was enough, well over $1 million, to constitute a federal crime. It was wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. It was a career-ending, life-destroying, go-to-prison level of crime. "He's not just a cheater," Eleanor said, a grim satisfaction in her eyes. "He's a common thief. And now we have him." The stage had to be perfect. A courtroom battle would be messy, public, and traumatic for Lily. Eleanor and I agreed. This needed to be a quiet, private execution. The confrontation had to happen on my terms, in our space, where he felt most powerful and was therefore most vulnerable. I told Mark I wanted to make a special dinner for him. "Just the two of us," I said, my voice trembling with expertly feigned sincerity. "To reconnect. To get back to how we used to be." His ego, already dangerously inflated by my recent submissiveness, swelled to comical proportions. He readily agreed, smugly certain that his difficult, emotional wife had finally been broken and was ready to beg for his forgiveness. He had no idea he was accepting an invitation to his own surrender. That night, I cooked his favorite meal, pan-seared scallops and risotto. I opened a bottle of the expensive Chardonnay he loved. I set the table in our formal dining room, the one we only used for holidays. The air was thick with unspoken words. I played my part to perfection, the adoring, penitent wife. I asked about his day. I laughed at his jokes. I let him talk about his triumphs at work, letting him feel like the king of his castle one last time. After dinner, I led him into his home office. The room was his throne room, all dark mahogany, worn leather, and the faint scent of expensive cologne. This was where he made his deals, where he held his power. It was the perfect place to strip him of it. He sat down in his large leather chair behind the massive desk, a self-satisfied smirk on his face, expecting a tearful apology. I remained standing. "Mark," I said, my voice perfectly level, "we need to talk about our divorce." He scoffed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, here we go again. Sarah, we've been over this. You're not thinking clearly." He was about to launch into his usual gaslighting monologue, the one designed to make me feel small and crazy. But before he could get the words out, I reached into the briefcase Eleanor had prepared for me and slid a thick, spiral-bound document across the polished surface of his desk. It made a soft, heavy sound as it came to a stop in front of him. On the plain white cover, in simple black letters, were 3 words: "The Vance Proposal." He looked at the document, then at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He opened it. The first page wasn't text. It was a high-resolution 8x10 photograph. It was of him, Amelia, and their son Leo, smiling on a blanket in Lincoln Park, the Chicago skyline clear in the background. It had been taken 2 weeks ago by a private investigator. His face went white. He frantically flipped to the next page, and the next. Each one was a fresh hammer blow, systematically dismantling the world he had so carefully constructed. There were more photos, dozens of them, documenting his parallel life. There were copies of bank statements from offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, detailing the money he had stolen. There was a full damning report from Arthur, the forensic accountant, laying out the entire embezzlement scheme with irrefutable proof: wire transfer receipts, incorporation documents for his shell companies. There were verbatim transcripts of the recordings I had made, including the chilling conversation with Amelia, where he plotted to take Lily from me by branding me an unfit mother. And near the back there were 2 more documents, a fully prepared, ready-to-be-filed complaint to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and a second, identical complaint addressed to the head of compliance at his firm. His smug confidence didn't just crack. It evaporated. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a pasty, sickly pallor. He stared at the pages, his hands trembling. The journey from arrogance to disbelief to raw, primal terror took less than 30 seconds. He finally looked up at me, but the man I knew was gone. In his place was a cornered animal. For the very first time, he wasn't looking at his fragile, emotional wife. He was looking at a stranger, a woman who had him in a steel trap of his own making, and he had no idea how she'd done it. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before I spoke. My voice was calm, devoid of the emotion he had always used against me. It was the voice of a CEO conducting a hostile takeover. "There is no negotiation," I said, gesturing to the proposal. "The terms are all in there, but I will summarize them for you. I get the house. I get full sole legal and physical custody of Lily. You will have supervised visitation twice a month at a location of my choosing. Your continued access to your daughter will be contingent on your perfect behavior.